Welcome to the Chats with Yvonne podcast with me, your host, Yvonne Armenta. I talk about public speaking because I love it and I want to help you love it too. Today's segment is part two of my conversation with Abby Benedetto, educational consultant and founder of Course Shifts. If you haven't listened to part one, I suggest you go back and take a listen to that one. This is a pre recorded conversation with Abby. Let's just go ahead and get right into it. I went on your LinkedIn bio and it says working at the intersection of school reimagination and anti-racism. What does that mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. I'm trying to figure that out. I make this claim, and then I'm like, what does that actually mean? So I think given that so much of education still resembles what it looked like in literally the 1800s, right? That you walk into a classroom across America today and there are kids sitting in rows. They are often segregated by certain identities. A teacher is talking at them. And if you walked up to any student in that classroom and said, like, why are you learning this? They'd be like, I have no effing clue why, right? And so my hope was that by working at more of a systems level with schools or school districts or states to try to think about just ways we might redraw, right, what school looks like, that might be where I could have some larger impact. And so originally I did that for the same organization that ran the schools that we were both in, an amazing organization called Envision Learning Partners. And really, that was where I was working with folks to do similar things to what you experience as a student, right? Like people who wanted to learn how to do portfolio defenses and people who wanted to learn about different types of assessment or whatever. And then that sort of morphed into really thinking about like, what's the center of gravity of school? And what I mean by that is historically, and where school hasn't changed often, is like school is about like reading, writing, arithmetic, right? Or all this like antiquated notion that students are these empty vessels and adults are the holders of knowledge. And we're just cramming that knowledge into these vacuous heads of young people. And then all we need to do is have them regurgitate that back to us. And then that means they know something, right? Yeah. No, let's not do that. And so sort of that became the work of like, what if we put skills, right? This is what I was talking about earlier around public speaking. Like, what if we decide on a set of skills that this community thinks is important for that young people will need when they leave the walls of school, right? I bristle when people talk about the real world, because I'm like, when you were in high school, that was your real world. Like that's not fake. It's not whatever. But there is a world outside of the walls of school that's different. And so really trying to figure out, instead of having, I think what my experience was like leaving the walls of school and being like, I have to like be a critical thinker. Like I have to like make decisions. I have to like justify my argument with evidence. Like I was never taught how to do that. I was just taught how to write like a 5-paragraph essay that whatever. So really that has been the bulk of my work recently, of figuring out how does a community go through a process that feels like it's not being done to them? And by community, I mean young people at the table, right? Students guiding us, so that it doesn't feel like, again, decisions are being made that directly impact the lives of young people without their consent, without their participation, without their voices. So that community is saying, you know what? I think probably the most important thing that our young people need is to like be globally aware, because we're a really insular community and we don't have a lot of whatever. And so they might reach for something like global perspective and then collaboration. So essentially it's like this idea of how do we actually say that reading, writing, arithmetic is still really important, but it's the vehicle by which students will practice and learn these skills that they actually can't Google, and that that's impossible to take a multiple choice test about, but that actually is going to help them be successful and have them create the lives in which they're going to thrive.
I love that.
And then how do we do things like teach it, assess it, and all that stuff. So that's really what I was doing. And then sort of as the world turned upside down with COVID and the murder of George Floyd, and I just sort of felt like, what am I doing walking through this world in my white body, and how can I do more explicit actions that are leading to maybe a more equitable and just and beautiful world. And so that was where I was sort of like, if I'm redesigning systems of education, but I'm not explicitly, as a white person, talking with other white people, at least, about the ways in which white supremacy is showing up, even in this new system, right? Then we're just like putting on a different sweater. Like, it's the same crap that just like we're calling it something different. And so that's really where I'm trying to work now. And I don't feel like I have the answers, but I think I'm really trying to make sure that as I work with folks around the country and really passionate and thoughtful and beautiful educators, it's like, how can we do the work of reimagining and redesigning what school could look like and the experience that young people could have, um, in a way in which we're being thoughtful and learning how to work across difference, and making sure that we're centering the voices that generally aren't heard and are most impacted by inequity, so that we're not just like doing the same old thing again and again, because that's the crazy making part.
Right. And I admire that so much because it does take a lot of work, both inner work, but then actually going out there and executing on it. And I'd love to hear, and we've sort of tapped into it a little bit, but I'd love to hear what your perspective on how public speaking as part of your curriculum or something that you do, how can we leverage public speaking to reimagine education and to be anti-racist, like keep anti-racism at the top
Yeah.
of our minds? Like how can public speaking be used as a tool for achieving that, in your opinion?
It's such a good question. And two thoughts come up first. One is that, I think that for many people, and I'm thinking of rooms that I walk into as like this, consultant. I'm not a part of these communities. I'm an outsider. And so I think my job often, especially in the beginning, is to, I think maybe what I was saying earlier, it's to paint a picture of what is possible, because I think so many educators are so overburdened. Teaching is such a hard job. You're asked to do so much that like so many educators have to be like this, right? It's just like heads down. What am I doing today? How can I help this one student tomorrow? That like educators aren't given the opportunity or the privilege to like step back, take a breath, look up and say, what is possible? And so I think when I come in, I'm often like walking into district wide PDs, professional development. And so as a teacher, oftentimes those are the days that we hate the most, because it feels like, you're in a room with a bunch of people and you got to sit there. It's the way that students feel coming into our classes, by the way. Like the irony of that is not lost on me. But so many times it often feels really disconnected. Like, could I just be home grading or whatever, right? And so I know that walking in, and I'm there to be like, to do this sort of like song and dance. But really what I realize is that this is an opportunity, if I do this well, to give teachers, to create the conditions for teachers to pause, to look up, and to then like try to draw a picture of possibility for them, so that they will step out of the like, yeah, but, right? Like that's unfortunately a really pervasive mindset in education. It's like, yeah, that's all nice, but like this kid can't do that. Or yeah, but our school doesn't have, right? And because I think education does have a mindset of scarcity for very like real reasons, right? Like, oh, there's not enough paper to make copies today. Like that's a very real experience of teachers. And so, but I think that scarcity mindset pervades everything, which makes it really hard for teachers to live in a world of possibility. So I think as a public speaker, part of that change process is like even just like saying, let's just dream a little bit, right? Let's dream together. It's not my dream, but let me try to inspire and do something so that we can dream together. So I think that's one way. But I think the other way, and I think the way more powerful way, is that when you got up as a student, Yvonne, and when you did your defenses, any adult in that room could not help but be transformed, because when you got up there, we saw you. We were able to see you and your potential. And there was no adult in that room that after your presentations could be like, yeah, but I don't really think that that's what she was, like it's just, it, when we have students doing that public speaking, and when we have students, now I often will start many of these PDs if I can with like student panels or recordings of student voice, because it's like when the young people that you say that you're coming to work every day for, when that young person is saying, this is what I love about school and this is what makes me feel lit up, and then this is where my soul feels crushed, or like the whatever, you can't look away from that. And I feel like that to me feels like a real key to change, of like, how do we center and how do we bring students' voices as public speakers so that they feel safe and empowered and celebrated to tell their stories about their lived experience of school, not in a way where teachers feel attacked or whatever, but in a way of like the voices of who we are there for, saying like, I would really love it if like I could do something that relates to my life outside of school. And then you can't have teachers be like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Like it's much harder. So I think like and sorry, and to just to really quickly go back to like, it also, especially when we have those students, when we can create the conditions of safety so that the students who are speaking are our more marginalized identities, then it's like teachers can't say like, well, only the AP kids can do that, right? It's like, I'm sorry, did you just see that beautiful student who also happens to have an IEP say this brilliant thing? Like, so I think that also works to the equity piece. It's that it's just harder to hold on to these um, antiquated and really detrimental beliefs that I think the system of education holds on to.
And Abby, I think what you just talked about at the very beginning too, about imagining and really painting the picture and the vision for somebody and just tapping into our imagination about what things could be, is such a beautiful way of putting it, and helping people see what maybe our day to day doesn't allow us to dive into, which I think is part of,
Yes.
I can only imagine, and I've seen being an educator anytime, all the time, has always been difficult, because to your point, you're with student parents give you their students to do some kind of good with them, and then there's multiple parties and there's stakeholders involved. It isn't just you, which is a good and can be a bad thing too. It feels, so yeah, I wanted
Yeah.
to appreciate that there, because you painted the picture for us there, and I feel hopeful and very good about the like where education is headed, because I think a lot of students too are also starting to be, I mean, my little sister is in high school. She's now 18. Wait, no, how old am I? She's
I
17.
no.
She's 17,
No.
and Abby, she's going to college
No.
next year. And
No. Oh
yes,
my
I
god.
know. And it's killing me. It's killing me inside, killing me very softly. And I so badly want her.
I remember that little human coming into like family conferences and like drawing on paper. Oh my
Yes, she
god.
is
That's
now
impossible.
grown, and it's been so interesting to see her development into like a young adult, because she's good at the things that I haven't been really good at, right? Like things like literally
Mm.
expressing boundaries and communicating them and being like, hey, I don't want to talk right now, and it's nothing against you, I just don't want to talk right now, can you please close my door? And then my initial reaction being like, no, I'm not about to close the door, like I live here, like you better, and then being like, wait, she just expressed this to me. I should respect that, right? And so it's funny, because I also think it's like a generational thing where my sister, and I don't know if adults felt this way about me, but I'm like, my sister seems to be just so way ahead than I was when I was in high school, and just thinking about things differently and having
Yeah.
different conversations with her friends, and just it's a lot more
Yeah.
advanced than I think I was at that moment. And so I also wonder too, on from the students' perspective, they're having a lot more conversations about this among themselves, and creating an understanding about
Yeah.
who they are as students and who they want to be, in the world and in their future. So a combination of all those things, I think, calls for change, for like a deep look into
Really does.
everything, and understanding how can we change and move forward into this reimagined version of education and what it
Yeah.
means to everybody, not just to educators, students, but also the people that are impacted by schools. And so yeah, I
Yeah.
absolutely love the work that you're doing, that you have always done, and how much of your time you've actually dedicated to doing these things, because I know that being a teacher is also a
Mm,
dedication of time, and an educator. And then now when you're educating the educators and trying to, I can imagine that is a whole different set of interesting things that
it
pop up.
is.
um, I want to ask
It
you if
really
there's
is.
anything else that you'd like to share, whether it be around the work that you're doing and centering student voice, or even it doesn't have to be related to public speaking. But is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience today about this conversation?
I think, I mean, something that I've just been so like in awe of from the work that you're doing through Chats with Yvonne and your incredible just like the offering that you're giving the world through this work is like that and I think I've heard you say this, but like for me, public speaking is anything, right? It doesn't mean that you're getting up in front of an audience of 1,000 people. It doesn't mean that you're facilitating something or whatever. And I think that like I was telling a story to my partner when I came home from a trip like a couple weeks ago, where I was like, yeah, I was like in front of a room of 150 strangers, and I knew that when I walked in, they did not like me. And by the end of the day, I think they liked me, right? And it was just like, and not that it's about liking me, but right, like I think they had a good time. That let me say that. Like I think it was a valuable time. But like, yeah, like I made them laugh, and like whatever, we told stories together. But like that's not the only way that public speaking happens. And like his response was like, whoa, like many people that would have been like the scariest thing to do in the world, right? And for me, I'm like, actually it's where I feel really at home. But I think that what my hope is that, and I really believe that through the work that you're doing, is that people can find a way in which they're just able to express themselves in a way that makes them feel like they're home, right? Like it's like that public speaking is about like taking these incredible thoughts that everybody has that often we keep like in here because of a whole variety of reasons, and just like sharing it with the world and like seeing what comes back to you. And so I think like that's was always what I hoped students would do in my class when I even asked them to like raise their hand and answer a question or talk with each other or whatever. And that's sort of my hope that the educators I work with can experience from talking to their students or talking to each other. But just really feeling like if more people shared the brilliant things that are going on inside their brains and felt really at home doing that, I think we'd all be better off.
I agree with you, Abby. And I want to end our segment today by asking you how people can get involved with what you're doing, whether, what either advice, or just how can educators that may be listening to this, how can they, maybe they're one person that really believes in this and they have an entire system or entire school that they have to convince otherwise, or whatever it is. How can people work with you, and how can even students begin advocating within their schools to have this be part of their
Mm.
of their student journey?
I love that. That's such a good question. Well, I think in terms of people working with me, I'm always like, literally any workshop I give, I'm always like, just call me or send me an email. Like, I want to talk to people about this, right? So at the very base level, it's like, call me or send me an email. But I think the thing that I'm really passionate about that is just starting is I there's like a whole strand of education work that I do, but then again, sort of through the time of sort of this country's version of the racial reckoning that happened in 2020, I co-designed, and I facilitate groups in white affinity, so white folks talking with other white folks around like developing our own anti-racist practice. And I think that I've learned incredible value in affinity because it's a where white people can sort of learn without doing harm to folks of color in our learning process, right? And then figure out how do we then want to move differently through the world in more, with a more anti-racist lens. And those are those are courses that people can sign up for. I'm currently just launching one with teachers, which I'm really excited about. Of like, I wish I had somebody pushing me on like how my whiteness was showing up in my teaching, and so I'm trying to create opportunities for other white teachers to do that. But then also the original course was just for anybody, any white person who wanted to talk with other white folks and do some learning about like how are we subject to white supremacy culture, and then how are we possibly perpetuating it without knowing it. And how can we just be a little bit more aware? So folks can find that. I can like we can drop website in the show notes or whatever. But then I think more so, having nothing to do with me, I think if teachers or students are listening to this, I just think like there was something beautiful in my teaching that happened when I moved from this more like this model that I had been taught of like, well, it's an English class, so students write you an essay and then you grade that essay and then you give it back, right? Like whatever, like that's how we learn English. To being like, let's actually just have fun, like talking and thinking about the world together. And so I moved into more of like a discussion based classroom where we would do Socratic seminars where students would be leading discussions about stuff and I would just be sitting back listening. And students did like public proposals about their ideas about a book that we were reading instead of writing a big old essay. So I just think like any teacher, regardless of their subject area, if you just try to think about like what are ways in which you could have students leading more than you are, students talking more than you are, and then figure out how can you make that comfortable for the students in your class. And then I think if you're a student, to just like start to like be like, could we do, I think the best thing was when a student would be like, Abby, could I do this instead? And I was always like, yes, that sounds awesome. I hadn't thought of that, but yes, do that, right? And so I think that so many times students and teachers fall into this like positionality thing, right? Of like, well, the teacher makes the decisions and the students just go along with the decisions or don't and get in trouble. It's like, no, let's flip that. Like, students, why don't you suggest like, hey, I'd love to like talk to somebody about, I don't know, whatever. But like that students can sort of feel not only empowered, but like almost like, yeah, this is my job as a student. Like this is part of my role as a student and I get to do this. And it makes everything better when a student says, could I make a video about this? Cool. Yes, make a video, So yeah,
Hey, they
I
might
think
be
at
the
the base
next
level,
social media star. So
we gotta flip it.
you gotta let them
Yeah.
explore
I don't
that
know how to do
video.
that. Yes. Yes. Make a darn
Yeah.
TikTok.
Go viral. Yeah. I love that. And Abby, everything about this conversation, I think this is exactly what I feel you do. I haven't been in those sessions, but I feel like this is sort of what you do. And it's like people leave feeling like, okay, this is going to be hard work, but I can do it. Like I have a motivation.
Hmm.
I'm inspired by it. And so it's going to require me to really dig deep. And I think even in when we were in high school and the public speaking and the portfolio defenses, though we were irritated by the fact that we had to look through 10 of our essays or 10 of our projects and figure out how this can, like, I think that the hard work had really awesome benefits. And so I think the work that you're doing is
Hmm.
just so cool. So thank you. Thank you for sharing it. And obviously we'll stay in touch because we always do. I think our relationship will be lifelong. I don't think you could get rid of me.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this conversation with Abby. I hope that you learned so much. I hope that you left feeling inspired. And most importantly, I hope that you see how public speaking can truly transform education, can truly transform students and adults. If you want to learn more about the work that Abby does over at Course Shifts, please check out her website, courseshifts.com, and reach out to her. Gracias por estar aquí. This was Chats with Yvonne, Public Speaking con Cultura.